Welcome to Civic Buzz, a program of the League of Women Voters Minneapolis. I'm Ellen Van Iwarden, the League's Program Director, and I'm glad you've joined us tonight. Our mission at the League is to encourage informed and active participation in all levels of government. As a nonpartisan organization, we work to increase understanding of major policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. We do meaningful work and have been doing so for over 100 years. Please join us. You can find out more at our website, lwvmpls.org. I'm happy to announce that our last Civic Buzz of this season will be in person. On Tuesday, May 2nd, we'll hear Chief Brian O'Hara of the Minneapolis Police Department. The event will be at 7:00 p.m. at Plymouth Congregational Church at 1900 Nicollet Avenue South. Please join us in person for what is sure to be an informative evening on our city's public safety. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce Craig Freeman of Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative. As Community Connections Manager, Craig shares Beacon's vision that all people have a home, no exceptions. By leading informational tours, presenting to congregations, civic organizations, or businesses, and representing Beacon in public, he works to increase the organization's capacity to provide homes. Craig left a decade-long career as a litigator in order to do this work because home is too important not to support with everything he's got. Craig, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Ellen, and thank you all for being here. It's an absolute pleasure. I love getting out and speaking, and when I've spoken to League organizations in the past, it is always just a wonderful conversation with great questions. So, with that said, I am going to start sharing my screen for my slideshow. So as mentioned, I am the Community Connection Manager at Beacon, and really that means I do things like this, whether it's in person, at our buildings, virtual. I introduce people to the work that we do at Beacon, whether it's for the first time or the 100th. And at least a couple folks that I've noticed names on this call, it's definitely not for the first time. So welcome to those of you who already know what I'm about to talk about, as well as those who don't. Regardless of how it is that I'm presenting though, I always like to start by asking people to think to themselves, if you were to close your eyes and picture the word home, what is it that you see in your mind's eye? Now, when I ask that question, I get all kinds of different answers. I'll hear things like warmth, safety, security. Home is that place where we go at the end of a long day. We take our shoes off, make ourselves a meal, get a good night's sleep, so we're ready for whatever the next day might bring. I'll hear things like memories. Home is where we have family dinners, we celebrate holidays, and we do those things that we're going to carry with us really throughout our lives. I'll hear specific things within a home. I hear TV, kitchen, bed. I hear dog so often. I hear it way more than I hear cat. And I hear it way more than I hear spouse. But regardless of what it is that people think of when they picture home, Beacon as an organization exists because far too many folks in this country, in the state of Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, they don't have that place. They're doing things like sleeping in cars, riding the bus or the train all night, couch hopping from one friend's couch to another. As we've seen just up close and personal over the last 5 or so years, they're camping in Minnesota, even in the dead of winter. On these chilly, rainy days, there are people outside in tents. Well, at Beacon, we see a world where cars, buses, and trains are just transportation. Couches are a place to watch a movie And tents exist only for when you want to get away from it all for a little while and go make yourself some s'mores. At base, we're working to help build a movement that says it is inexcusable in this society where we have so much that there are those experiencing homelessness. I don't know what the number's up to now, but the state surplus is what, $17 billion? We have the ability, if we truly wanted to end homelessness today. And that is what we are working on. We need to be doing this because, I don't need to tell you how bad the problem is. We see it absolutely every day. That's the homelessness problem that we see. But what folks maybe don't always see quite so well is how housing instability can be an issue. So people are housed, but it's not necessarily in a way that is going to be good for the long term. We know that currently in the state of Minnesota, there are more than 550,000 Minnesotans living in a household that is paying more than half of their income every month for their housing. Now, when you're paying that much, if something happens, like your car breaks down, or you have an unexpected medical bill, that's when homelessness can occur. Those are the folks who are in danger of sliding into living on the street. So these are some big, difficult issues. But at Beacon, we have so much hope around it. Because as one of our leaders likes to say, why are people homeless? Because we allow it. We have absolutely everything we need, as I say, to end homelessness tomorrow. We just have to stand up as one and demand of our elected officials that they make home the priority that it is. So start out here with a little bit of Beacon 101 about who we actually are. And I always like to start with these 4 values, because these are the core values of Beacon as an organization. Every single decision that we make, we ask ourselves, how does this decision affect these 4 core values? And the one I always like to point out is race equity, because it is absolutely impossible to do this work anywhere, but especially in the Twin Cities where we have such racial disparities around housing without centering race equity. To illustrate how important it is, if you look at the population of the state of Minnesota, if you're looking at adults, about 6% of that population is African American. About 1% is Native American. That's about 7% of the population between those two groups. But if you look at those who are experiencing homelessness, of adults, 37% are African American, 12% are Native American. So 49%, basically half of those experiencing homelessness, come from just 7% of the state's population. You can't do this work unless you center race equity. So who are we as an organization? Well, we were founded back in 1999, Plymouth Congregational Church, where you're going to be having a meeting next month, I hear, and where a number of you I know are members. They looked around their neighborhood and they saw a number of folks who were experiencing homelessness. People like a man named Peter. Peter had lived in the neighborhood for years. He lived there, worked there, went about his life there. But Peter had lost his housing. So now when it came time to find someplace relatively warm, relatively safe to rest his head at night, he had to leave the neighborhood and go someplace else. Well, the congregation saw this and they looked across the street and they saw the building there on the screen, which at the time was an unused nursing home. And they thought to themselves, can we take this unused asset and turn it into something to meet this unmet need? Can we create homes for people like Peter? Now, they talked about it and they decided, you know what? Not only can we do this, we need to do this. Our faith is calling us to do this. So they went to the neighborhood and they said, here's the plan. Isn't it great? And the neighborhood said, nope, we don't want those people here. We don't want the crimes they're going to do. There's already enough affordable housing around here. Somewhere else needs to stop. But the congregation knew they were on the right track and they pushed forward. For the next year, their Sunday morning services were picketed. When one of the leaders in the congregation got married, the wedding was picketed. When the city granted the land use changes necessary on the property, the neighborhood sued. They took it all the way up to the Court of Appeals. But the congregation stood strong, and in 2003, Lydia Apartments, our very first development, opened. 40 homes for single adults who've experienced homelessness and are dealing with a persistent mental or physical disability. 40 homes for people like Peter. Now, part of the reason why I love telling that story when I give presentations is because then I get to fast forward a little and talk about how attitudes around affordable housing can change over time. Because back in about 2016, we decided we wanted to expand Lydia. Where you see on that picture there, that awning and front door, we decided we wanted to put an addition that would double the size of the building from 40 homes to 80. And we went back to the neighborhood and we very sheepishly said, here's the plan, isn't it great? And the neighborhood's response at that time was, actually, can you add more? Because they'd been able to see that over the 13 years or so that Lydia had been there at that point, that having the building in the neighborhood wasn't a detriment, it's a benefit. It makes the neighborhood a better place to live. So I'm thrilled to say that this past summer, we cut the ribbon on that expansion. There's now a 6-story expansion there, and 40 more folks are able to call Lydia home because people understand how important home is. We've grown as an organization since then. We are now over 100 congregations all across the Twin Cities metro area, plus countless folks who don't belong to a congregation. Which the great thing about this is now when we announce a new building and we hear those exact same comments about not wanting those people here, instead of just one congregation, it's all 100 plus all these other folks standing shoulder to shoulder on behalf of affordable housing. We've also grown in the number of buildings we have. We're now up to 19, again, all across the metro area, with 6 more in development. In just a few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about 2 of those specific buildings. But most of our buildings are more than just a roof over the head. They're what's called supportive housing. So what that means is we partner with an organization who specializes in providing services to the population that is going to live in that building. And then they have offices right there on site in order to provide those services. So that can be big things like help with finding education or finding employment, navigating the healthcare system, or dealing with trauma. I mean, if you're living in one of our buildings, you've experienced homelessness, you've experienced trauma. So dealing with that is important. It can also be down to small things though. Like in our youth buildings, our partners sometimes hear questions like, how do you cook spaghetti? How do you do your laundry so it doesn't come out all gray? Whatever it is that residents need, staff of our partners is right there to provide. But what we've really learned over the now 24 years that we've been doing this work is that while we need so many more Lydia apartments, so many more Great River landings, so many more Pimosedas, we can't purely build our way out of this housing crisis. We need to change the policies and systems that allow homelessness to occur in the first place. The main way we're doing that is through our legislation, Bring It Home Minnesota, which again, I'll talk about a little more in depth here in a couple minutes. Turning back to the creating of those homes though. These are different homes than a lot of folks might think of when they hear about affordable housing. The term affordable housing has a lot of different meanings. It can mean folks who are earning 80% of the area median income. And I'll explain what that means momentarily. Or 50% of the area median income. What we do is we build homes for folks making the least 30% of the area median income. In the Twin Cities metro area, which includes all the outlying counties, that amount is about $25,000 a year for an individual, about $31,000 a year for a family of 4. Now, like I say though, that is for the entire Twin Cities metro area. In Minneapolis, 30% of the area median income would be substantially less. We're talking somewhere for a family of 4 there, we're talking probably somewhere $18,000 to $20,000 a year. These are the most difficult homes to build because they need the most in them. They're for folks with the absolute most need. But what they do is they provide just a really safe, stable foundation for the folks who then get to call them home. And we do everything we can to build them in an area that works for the residents, close to places where they can work, close to places where they can get to school, close to transportation so they can get around town. And we also do absolutely everything we can when creating these buildings to make them of a type that folks can really be proud of. They're not just a place to have a bed. They are a home. So we go that extra mile on finishes, around on cabinetry and around flooring to make it so that folks can really be proud of the place they live. These are the types of homes that we build at Beacon. One of those homes, actually one of the most recent ones to open, is Great River Landing. So Great River Landing is located in the North Loop in Minneapolis. It's right on 5th Street, just about 3, maybe 4 blocks up from Target Field. And it is 72 homes for men, primarily African American fathers, who have exited incarceration and experienced homelessness. So it's folks literally moving into this building from being incarcerated. Now, of those 72 homes, 40 are kind of standard efficiency studio apartments. So they are a single room with a kitchen and a bathroom. 32 of them, however, are community suites, where 4 men share a common area of a kitchen and a living room, but then they have their own room off of it. The reason we have this division in this building is because our initial service provider at the building had learned over the years that one of the major issues facing folks exiting incarceration is they tend to withdraw from community. They go into themselves. So by having these community suites, which is the first place that a person moves into when they move into the building, it kind of forces some community. It forces them to be a part of something, which then helps with their adjustment to being outside of incarceration. Now, I mentioned that this was our original service provider. Great River Landing has had, I'm going to be honest here, a difficult start. It opened in the fall of 2019, so just about 6 months or so before the pandemic hit. And then it was dealing with the pandemic. And about that same time, the top 2 staff members at our initial service provider left. And the organization never really fully recovered from that, to the point where this past fall, they had to close their doors, which left us a bit in the lurch. We took over temporarily providing the on-site services, but I'm thrilled to say that as of March 1st, we have a new on-site service provider, 180 Degrees, a fantastic organization that has been working with this very population on this very issue for more than 50 years here in the Twin Cities. So everything we are confident now is moving forward and on the up and up at Great River Landing. But despite those difficulties, we've still seen tremendous successes at Great River Landing. Men, moving on with their lives, getting the next step, and getting themselves away from incarceration and the recidivism that is so common amongst folks who are leaving incarceration. Another building, this is one that's still under construction, is BMO Seda. BMO Seda is a really interesting building. As far as we know, it's a first of its kind in the country. So it is a partnership with the Red Lake Nation. BMO Seda is an Ojibwe word that translates essentially as "let's walk together." And this building is going to be providing services on what's called a housing first model. So what that means is even if you have an untreated mental health issue or an ongoing chemical dependency issue, we're going to get you housed. Then we're going to have intensive services once you are housed to help you deal with whatever it is that you're facing. This building is still under construction, downtown Minneapolis, basically Hennepin and 4th, right across the street from the downtown Hennepin Library. It's going to eventually have 48 homes and a beautiful rooftop garden area for folks to check out the skyline, as well as great space on the ground floor for Avivo, who will be our service providing partner there to do their tremendous work. This building has been an experience for us. It is a historic building. It's about 130 years old. Most recently, it was the Rockler Fir building. So when we first took it over, we actually found a whole bunch of old ratty firs in the building that we were at first thinking, well, we need to dispose of these. But one of the great things about the partnership with Red Lake is I happened to mention the existence of these firs to someone from Red Lake, and his response was, can we get those? Because a lot of young people, when they're creating their first outfit for powwow dancing or various other things like that, they need fur to go on these outfits, but it's very difficult to get. So we of course said, absolutely, you can have it. And so they came in. First, they blessed all the furs and thanked the universe for them. And then they took those furs. Some stayed here for Red Lake members who are local. Some went up north to Red Lake itself. And now they're being used for those types of things. So it's just a wonderful partnership that we're super excited about and can't wait to open that building, hopefully by the end of 2024. Now, how do we make these homes a reality? Well, it takes a lot. First, we go out and we tell the story. You know, we tell stories of people like Peter. We tell the stories of folks like around those firs. And it starts to build passion and public will for folks to see these buildings get built. Once that passion and public will starts rolling, that's when we start seeing private contributions come. And those private contributions are absolutely vital for our work because we can leverage those into public investment. When we apply for public funds in order to actually build these buildings, which, by the way, in the current climate costs around $20 million to build, we can leverage private contributions up to 20 times. So what that means is if someone donates $50, we can turn that into $1,000 in public funds. If someone can dig super deep and donate $50,000, we can turn that into $1 million. We pool all these funds together, a little time goes by, and that's how these buildings actually happen. But with all the organizing costs and the housing development to find a site, to get an architect, it costs us about $21,000 per home in a building before a shovel even hits dirt. So what that means is in a 40-unit building, we're talking around $840,000 before we even start digging. In order to fund all that, we try and raise about $4 million per fiscal year, which started July 1. I'm thrilled to say I just got an update today. We are at $3.8 million for this fiscal year. So with 3 months to go, we have almost reached our goal, and we're going to get there because people understand just how important home is. And they want to make sure that we all have it. So while we're doing that, while we are continuing to create more homes because we need so many more, we are also working, as I mentioned, on Bring It Home Minnesota. So Bring It Home is legislation that we actually created about 4.5 years ago now, and started working on building a coalition to get this passed. What the legislation is it would fully fund rental subsidy in the state of Minnesota. So a lot of folks have heard phrases like Section 8 or rental voucher or rental subsidy, but don't necessarily know what it means. What it means is if you qualify financially, you can get a voucher that allows you to pay 30% of whatever your income is, and then the voucher pays the rest of it up for your rent. So you have a home you can afford, and the landlord is still able to get paid what the home is worth. It's a fantastic program. Unfortunately, there's only enough money in the program for about 1 in 4 who qualify. So what that means practically is we saw about 5 years ago or so now, the Met Council and cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul opened up the ability to apply to get on the wait list for a voucher. And they received more than 45,000 applications to get on that wait list. They only had space on the list for about 7,500. So more than 35,000 folks didn't even get waitlisted. And those that did, like I said, this was about 5 years ago, I would guess that 99% of them are still on that wait list, still waiting to get a voucher. Additionally, what it means for us as an organization, most of our buildings, we get from Met Council or from one of the cities, what's called a site-based Section 8 voucher. So it's a voucher that doesn't go to a person, but goes to a particular home. So each of the homes in our building have a voucher that whoever lives in it is able to get. But there's only so many vouchers for us to go around as well. So we might go to the Met Council and say, we have a 50-unit building that's coming online. We need 50 vouchers for this unit. And the Met Council can say, no. And now folks won't be able to live in that building because we can't afford to run a building unless we're getting paid a regular rent. And we can't charge a full rent of the folks who are living in the building. So if we're able to get rental subsidy, we truly believe this would virtually end homelessness because everyone who financially qualifies would be able to get that voucher and be able to afford their home. It was introduced this year for the 4th straight year. Representative Howard of Richfield is carrying the bill in the House, and Senator Mohammed of Minneapolis is carrying it in the Senate. We've also grown that coalition. There's now over 40 housing organizations from around the state, because this is a statewide problem, that are in the coalition. And it's looking promising that there is going to be at least some money this year for Bring It Home. Not nearly enough. I mean, we're talking a few $1 million when we need probably about $1.5 billion. But to put that in perspective, $1.5 billion is about 3% of the state's annual budget. Currently, the state of Minnesota spends 0.5% on housing. 0.5%. Simply increasing that to 3% could virtually end homelessness in Minnesota. We're going to get there. Not this year, unfortunately, but we're going to keep plugging until we get all the way there. Now, all that said, it looks like I've been talking for about a half hour, which is right on time. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give folks some next steps if you want to get more involved with Beacon. So here we have a couple of events that are coming up. First up, on the 16th and the 30th, my organizing colleagues are hosting a 2-part training on unpacking race and housing. How did we get in the Twin Cities to where we have such disproportionate housing, both in rental and home ownership, amongst races? It's a horrifying and fascinating story about how we got here. And they really go deep into it and ask all of us to explore, how did my race, my ancestors' race, get me to where I am today? It's a really great training. Then next up on May 9th, we are having another Action for Affordable Housing at the state capitol, again, in conjunction with all those other 40 housing organizations. And you can register for that on our website and meet us at the Capitol and really push again and again to make sure that housing is the priority. Lastly, this is a statewide problem that we're trying to find a statewide answer to. So we need everyone to know what's going on. So I would love to have you invite folks to come to one of my presentations. I do something similar to this absolutely every Wednesday at 2 o'clock virtually. I change the topic each month. This coming month, I'm going to be talking about Vista 44, one of our in-development projects that we just closed on the financing last week, and ground is being broken this week in Hopkins. So I'm going to be going a little bit more in depth on that. Or just like with this, I can schedule a presentation in time that works for any types of groups, as well as on any topic that folks are interested in. With that, I want to say thank you again for having me. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see more folks. And I saw something came in the chat. And I would love to answer any questions folks might have. Oh, yeah, just letting them know we're doing Q&A. Any questions folks might have about what I talked about here, Beacon in general, housing in general. If I don't know the answer, I can always find the answer later. But I try and know the answer all the time. Anybody got a question? Yes, Jane.
You mentioned there are about 40 organizations that, and I presume I'm familiar with some like Aon and Common Bond and Aviva and all those that kind of provide a patchwork. I mean, they kind of patchwork together, I presume, to provide affordable housing and support. And, you know, how do we get past this place where we have all these organizations that are, I mean, it seems like we've got a lot of organizations that are really helping to provide this sort of support to people to get on their feet. And is that just what we need to depend on, is all these, you know, these 40 organizations coming together? And is there something more systemic that needs to happen? I mean, I don't even know what my question is really, but it seems crazy that there's like over 40 organizations that come from either church groups or community groups or whatever to support such a large problem.
Yeah, so it is a patchwork. You know, we have organizations like Aon, who is doing a great job buying naturally occurring affordable housing. And keeping it affordable so that it isn't purchased by a for-profit developer and turned into a market rate apartment. Then there's, you know, Habitat for Humanity, building homes, single family homes. Common Bond owns a lot of apartment buildings and also does a lot of property management and all that type of work. So there's a whole bunch of organizations who we all kind of have our niche and we're working in it. But it is a maze. When someone doesn't have housing, they don't necessarily know where to go because there's so many questions. We generally believe that, and I say we, I don't just mean Beacon, I say, you know, kind of the housing industry, the affordable housing industry in the Twin Cities, that Bring It Home is that first structural change that will help us get to the next step. There will need to be next steps because Bring It Home doesn't answer things like the home ownership disparities. It doesn't deal with that type of things. It's very much a first step, and then we'll move on from there. What the next step is, I don't know. There are some very smart people working to try and figure that out. But as soon as we get this step done, we're going to be moving on to that next one because we truly want to put ourselves out of business. If we don't want to have to do this work because no one should be in a situation where they need us to do this work. But it is structural and needs to be done. Does that kind of answer your not really knowing your question?
Yeah, I mean, is there just not enough housing? I mean, if there was more housing, would that solve it or not? I mean, I think that there's also the need for the support that goes with the housing.
Yes, it's all of the above. There isn't enough housing. We absolutely need more of all types, especially supportive housing, because that is how a lot of folks, especially at that 30% AMI area, that's how they're going to be successful when they have those on-site supports, and they're not just kind of left out on their own. We need more market rate apartments too. I mean, we need more homes across the board. And
Um,
Yeah, I'll
did
get you next, Pamela.
Go ahead, Pamela.
Okay.
Pamela, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I have a bunch of questions, but first of all, can you tell us a little bit more about the demographics of the people that are homeless? I mean, the whole homeless population, in terms of the individuals versus families, and particularly, and then if you could talk a little bit also about how you're handling the issues around drug use in your buildings, and how many people don't accept offers because they are drug users and need to stay, want to stay on the streets on their own, because of the drug things. So can
Yeah,
you talk a little bit how that interfaces with what you
Yeah.
do, what do you do about it?
So starting with the demographics, we know that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 11,000 folks experiencing homelessness every night in Minnesota. Obviously, that number is really difficult to get an actual handle on because folks who are sleeping in their cars, they're hard to count. But every 3 years, the Wilder Foundation does a big survey where they get a whole bunch of volunteers and they go out to all the shelters, all the organizations like us, and they literally count people and get demographic information. Then they extrapolate from there to get the folks that they can't count. And actually, they just did it last year, so hopefully we'll be getting the results from that here. Hopefully this summer we'll get their new numbers. It is definitely more single folks than families, thankfully. But at the same time, a lot of those single folks are young people. Around 6,000 young people, 16 to 24, are homeless and unaccompanied every night. That's a significant percentage of those experiencing homelessness. And there are plenty of families out there too. Those are particularly hard to get a count on because they're not going to shelters unless they're going to people serving people or like 2 or 3 other good family shelters. They're generally sleeping in their cars, or they've got a single room in a friend's house that they're able to all cram into. We know though that is where some of the most need is, because I always say to folks, as difficult as it is to find a 1-bedroom affordable apartment in the Twin Cities, finding a 2, 3, or heaven forbid 4-bedroom apartment to house your whole family is darn near impossible. So we're actually working right now to really increase the amount of family supportive housing we have. The vast majority of those buildings that we have in development, actually 4 of the 6 are family supportive housing, most of which will include those 4-bedroom apartments in order to kind of plug some of that gap. On the drug use question, our buildings, they vary around how they respond to that. So I mentioned that BMO SEDA will have services on a housing first model. We have 2 other buildings already open that have that housing first model, American House and Kimball Court, both in St. Paul. And because they are on a housing first model, they do see residents who are active users. And so the main difference for that building that we see is trying to provide as much security as we can there on site in order to protect the other residents as well as on-site staff and to keep things under control. But the model says we need to get you housed before you can deal with this issue. So that's what we do. And we're fortunate to have a partner in those buildings in Avivo who is just tremendous at that type of service. They were doing a ton of work, for example, at the Wall of Forgotten Natives, that first homeless encampment we saw at Hiawatha and Franklin back in 2018. And they do a lot of work with, those types of groups. So they do that. Some other of our buildings, like Lydia, our first building, that is a sober building. There is not even alcohol allowed in there, because a large percentage of the residents there are in recovery. And so they specifically choose a building that is dry for that reason. Our youth buildings are completely substance-free as well, which, since they go up to age 24, we tend to see a shorter stay in those buildings from the 22 and 23-year-olds who chafe against the rules about not being able to have a glass of wine or a beer, even though they're of age. So we see people tend to move out a little earlier there than some of our buildings. But really, we don't see much of an issue for it outside of those housing first buildings where we know it's an issue and we really focus on it.
Are we making a dent? This is great information. Thank you so much. Are we making a dent in the need to have the tent communities in all our neighborhoods? Are we
A
making
dent, a
yeah,
very small dent.
just a small dent?
Yeah, we know that. So there was about 250 to 300 people in the Wall of Forgotten Natives encampment. And we know that at that point, across just Minneapolis, there was about 1,000 people in that same situation. So we helped respond to that fairly quickly, even though we don't do like emergency response stuff. We moved a lot of folks into Kimball Court and American House out of the Wall of Forgotten Natives. And we got about 20 people moved out of there into our buildings. Now we've got BMO SADOC coming online, which is going to be about 50 more. But we need like 20 more BMO SADOCs before we're really making a dent.
Yeah.
So Craig, I was wondering, have you, first of all, I think what you're doing is fantastic. And I'm amazed that you sound so high-spirited because the problem is so huge. But I was just wondering if you have a sense of, it's kind of related to the, are we making a dent? The number of housing spots you're able to provide against the, not just the number that in need, but also Diane and I were at that Bring It Home event at the Capitol, and they're talking about thousands of people that are a month away from being evicted, so the problem is just so huge, and that's like the tail end of it. I really appreciated your commenting that we need to work at the way front end of the continuum where we just plain need more homes, which would help the rent prices as well. We had more of a supply. But I'm wondering if along the line in the Twin Cities, you're housing so many people, how many people need houses, as well as how many people end up needing houses each year, adding to the number of need.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we generally see, despite the great work of organizations like AON to grab up this naturally occurring affordable housing and keep it affordable, we still see generally a net loss each year in housing that's affordable, which makes it incredibly difficult. Our first family building that we opened was Creekside Commons, which is South Minneapolis, right across the street, parking lot basically from Mayflower Congregational Church, if you know where that is on Diamond Lake Road. We opened that in 2010, and there's 30 units in that building. At last I knew, as of about 2 months ago, last time I was there, 24 of those units are occupied by the family that moved in 2010 still, because there is no place else that they can move that they can afford. It's an incredibly massive problem, and it would be so easy. In fact, in some ways, it would be good for me to get overwhelmed and just on that type of thing. But we know that we can do this. We see it when we do these Bring It Home rallies, and we see it when we talk to organizations in outstate Minnesota, not just in Duluth and Mankato and some of the larger places, but in some of the smaller places where when we talk to them, they say, yes, bringing it home would help us. There's 15% of renters in this county that would benefit from it. We really see the hope, and we know it's an uphill battle, but we also know that we're going to get there. It's going to take a long time, a really long time. Unfortunately, I don't think I will be still working in this field when we are obsolete. But I'm going to keep trying to get there.
Well, I really applaud you. And it's nice to hear this kind of energy, because I get depressed thinking about how massive the whole thing is, But is there a net gain in terms of, no, you're just saying that that you're dealing with a small percentage of success next to what the actual problem is.
And so we just take our successes where we can, and we celebrate the heck out of those successes.
And stay hopeful. Yeah.
Diane? You're muted.
Yeah, thank you for being here. My question is more on the supportive services that you provide. So do you get support, financial support from the city or the state for those services?
Sorry, were you going to finish?
No, go ahead.
It depends on the building. Usually when we first open a building, we are funding the services purely from our annual fund. But once people are actually in the building, there are a lot of various opportunities for us to receive funding for that. Many of our residents qualify for, almost all of our residents qualify for some sort of public funding. And we're usually able to get that directed towards those supportive services, whether it's something from at the county level or the state level or even the federal level. Our on-site partners are well versed in figuring out where that money is going to be, and then they're able to get that funded so that we don't have to continue funding it out of our annual fund. We can move on to the next building from our annual fund.
Okay, thank you. But I have another question. Can I ask just one add on to that? So once you build a building and you have your residents in the building, does Beacon manage that building, or is there another is that outsourced?
We hire project managers. So once the building is fully opened, we are really just the landlord. We own the building. We make sure things are running well. We're always in contact with our on-site partners to make sure they're getting what they need. But all of our supportive buildings are. We have a partner. Premier is our property manager, and all of those buildings. We have a few different property managers in our buildings that aren't supportive. And so they are handling the day-to-day maintenance issues, collecting rent, getting the new residents in, which is entails working with the county to figure out who the next resident is, and those types of things.
And is there mentoring to your families that come to you? Is there some type of financial mentoring so that they can prepare to purchase their home? Or
absolutely
very difficult, but
yes,
get from under your umbrella.
Yes.
Move out.
Financial literacy classes, classes around parenting, especially for families. For our youth, they'll get cooking classes. Our youth buildings also tend to have things like acting classes and various things like that, just to help them develop skills for their life. Whatever residents need, those staff are so good at ensuring that there are people coming in and teaching those things.
I just want to, I'm going to quit talking in a minute. Okay. So there is some housing that exists in St. Paul. that I have some friends who live there, and they're down on 7th Street. Does Minneapolis have, I've not lived here a very long time, but does Minneapolis have housing like that? I'm not sure if you are familiar with it.
Are you talking about public housing type things?
I'm not sure if it's public housing. It's on 7th and Highland. So if anybody else knows if that's public housing, speak up. But it's very nice housing, and it looks like public housing, or it looks like it used to be public housing, and perhaps some private company took it over. I'm not sure, but I don't think we have that in Minneapolis, as far as I know.
I mean, there's a lot of our partners have housing around. I know Aon again and Common Bond are probably two of the bigger ones as far as owning apartment buildings that are kept affordable in Minneapolis itself. The thing is, for a lot of us, not all of us, like Common Bond, they have Common Bond properties on a sign out front. Like with Beacon, you're not going to know it's a Beacon property. You are not going to see our name anywhere because it's just an apartment building. It just happens to be affordable. So that you can't always tell just by looking at it if something is. 66 West in Edina, one of our youth buildings in particular, constantly get people knocking on the door wondering how to lease an apartment there. Of course, they can't because they don't qualify, but yeah, we do our best to make it just blend in with the name.
That's a good idea. Thank
Jane?
you.
Yeah.
I just wondered, when I finally left my house after the pandemic, I was just astounded at the number of new buildings. I live in South Minneapolis, so, along Lake Street and behind, and it's just astounding how many new apartment buildings there are, but how many of them are affordable? And is there any effort taken by the city to assure that some of these buildings will be affordable buildings?
There is, each municipality has different rules around percentage of a building that needs to be affordable. But then you run into, like I mentioned earlier, what is the definition of affordable? Because in most of the cases, affordable for those types of buildings is going to be at the low end, 60% of the area median income. So for a family that's earning $65,000 annually. So it's not for the folks who need it most. But it helps because we absolutely need more of that. But it's a small percentage. As I say, it depends on the municipality exactly what the percentage is, but it's always going to be a small percentage. And in a lot of cases, there are rules within a municipality where a for-profit developer can buy their way out of that. They can pay a set amount of money and not to the city, and then not have to build any affordable housing. Now, usually, like in Minneapolis, then when the money gets paid to the city, then it is used for affordable housing. So it goes into a pot that goes to organizations like us. But it means that in that particular development, there might not be any.
So the city has no commitment to building affordable housing for those who really need it.
It depends on the municipality. Minneapolis has done a very good job increasing the amount of money that is going every year into what they call their Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So like this year, the most recent budget added $3 million to it to get it to, I'm spacing on what the number is. $30-ish million, I want to say, that then they use to start buildings like ours. Like Emerson Village is one of our buildings that's in development and is in Minneapolis, and we got significant funds from the city for that. And one of the things we've been lobbying, especially Minneapolis, on, is to really focus that money on the 30% area median income number, because it is what needs the most help. It's not economically feasible. I mean, a for-profit developer cannot build a building at that area and ever make money on it. I mean, we don't make money on it, obviously, but we also don't want to. So. Anne?
I think like everybody else, I have more questions than I can even formulate, because maybe I wasn't listening carefully. Your funding is public, city,
The capital
state?
funding, the capital funding on the buildings to actually build the buildings is almost purely public. So every year in June, Minnesota Housing has a big request for proposals where we and every other housing organization says, these are the buildings we have in the pipeline. This is where it is. And there's a huge scoring mechanism that they use, and then they give an award. Now, though the funds that comes from Minnesota Housing are primarily two types of funds. There is low-income housing tax credits, which actually comes down from the federal government. It's IRS tax credits, which the IRS is actually the biggest funder of affordable housing in the country, not HUD.
Yeah.
And then the second big pot of money that the state has is from housing infrastructure bonds. So every other year, there's a big state bonding bill. And we are actually the only state in the country that says for those infrastructure bonds, housing is infrastructure. So usually there's $100,000 to $200,000 every other year that goes into $100 to $200 million that goes into affordable housing through that. So those funds are dispersed then by the state and through that process. We also generally get funds at the county level, and if it's Minneapolis or St. Paul, at the city level. If it's a building in one of the suburbs, that funding then comes to the Met Council rather than the city. It's an incredibly complicated process.
Yeah, so my main issue, as everybody who's heard me before in this group, is healthcare, fixing how we pay for healthcare, which I think contributes to homelessness and
vice versa.
Adequate housing. So that's a whole nother, that's a complexity there. But I guess what I started to understand about the cost of healthcare is that because we subsidize market-based healthcare systems, the cost is outrageously high. I mean, it's a whole nother problem because we allow ridiculous amounts of profiteering. But I'm wondering if housing is similar. Are we funneling public money into private developers and wasting money in the process, and is there a role for more public housing, well-regulated, well-managed public housing? And then the underlying problem of how do we match incomes to the cost of housing? This is it's another really layered problem.
Yes, it is very layered. I think in short, it is not nearly as big of an issue, the profiteering in housing, as it is in healthcare. I'm sure. Yeah, how could it be that big, right? I am sure still to some extent still happens, but it is tied to, these funds are tied to things that require at minimum housing to stay affordable for a period of time. Generally, that's 10 to 15 years. Now, on our end, it's always going to be affordable. And for all of our partners, it's always going to be affordable. And especially at the state level, it's our projects, whether it's us or Project for Pride in Living or Urban Homeworks or whomever, that is primarily getting that money. So it's generally going to nonprofits and permanent affordability.
Last question, because I know there are other people who have questions. Are we at risk of trying to lift the bottom and leaving people out who are barely able to afford housing at market rates, kind of lower middle income working people? What's your eligibility ceiling? All this eligibility stuff often leaves people out who just barely make it, you know.
And our eligibility varies depending on the building. Because we do have some older buildings that, like Creekside actually, is what's called workforce housing. And we also have Cranberry Ridge, our most recent building that opened in Plymouth, is largely workforce housing. So that's for folks who are earning 50 to 60% of the area median income.
Okay.
But it is a danger because we absolutely need so much more housing at that level as well. And so, you know, it's something where we're just going to have to keep working our way up and making sure people aren't falling through the cracks.
Well, kudos to you for
Thank you.
another human need that needs work.
Glenna.
Thank you. This has been highly educational. Are we in an eviction crisis because of all the people who didn't pay their rent during COVID? And if so, how does a newly homeless person find the resources they need? I mean, when I see people needing help on Nextdoor, I say call 211, you know, the United Way. But is that how people funnel into the system? How does someone get in to this system so that they actually get housed?
Well, as far as the eviction crisis, it fortunately is not as bad as it looked like it was going to be. The federal government came through with a lot of emergency rental assistance that saved a lot of folks. That said, it's still far worse than it should have been, because it should have been a situation where no one was losing their house because so many people simply couldn't work. Their jobs no longer existed. So on that rate, it's not as bad as it could have been, worse than it should have been. As far as getting into the system, there are a number of organizations who kind of help with that. Homeline is one. I think they do rental. So Homeline is an organization that helps. But generally the best thing to do is reaching out to the county. Because all of the counties here in the Twin Cities they're federally required to have what's called coordinated entry. And that is generally how folks then are able to find housing going forward. When someone is assessed by the county, they're giving a full assessment of their need for housing, and they get scored, and then they get put on a list. And based on their scoring, they get put where they go on the list. So when we or any of our partners then have an opening, well, in our case, it's our on-site service provider. They say, okay, we have an opening at Nicollet Square. So youth housing in Minneapolis, right on Nicollet. They say we had someone move out. We have a space for a 16 to 24-year-old. They contact the county. The county goes to their list and they give us they give YouthLink, who's our provider there, they give them the first name off the list. YouthLink then reaches out and tries to get a hold of them. With youth, their situation changes so quickly, they might have to go back to the county and say, give us the next name on the list, or they might reach them and be able to lease it. So being able to get on that coordinated entry list when you are in need of housing is really the key. So going through the county is very important.
Thank you.
Mary. You're muted, Mary.
Thank you for all the hard work you're doing. I have two questions. One is, how long can a family person stay in one of these units?
None of our buildings are time limited. So like in Lydia, we have a resident there who has lived in Lydia for 18 years.
Wow.
And we do see, depending on the building, it kind of varies. Across our youth buildings, it's an average stay of about 18 months. Partially for, as I mentioned earlier, just chafing against the rules, partially because young people, they want to take that next step, so they get some roommates and they go find themselves a market rate. And then it kind of depends. Our housing first buildings, it's an interesting mix. some folks move in and it just doesn't work for them, and they move out in a week, because they realize that they're not ready to deal with whatever big issues that they have. Some, they're there for a couple years. They stabilize for whatever their big issue is, and then they think, okay, I'd like to move into a different building, maybe Lydia, and have it be a dry building, something like that. Some folks have been in, especially Kimball Court, for 6, 7, 8 years. So it really varies.
Is there like a criteria to like for them to move out? So for instance, would they, if they got a job that paid more money, so they wouldn't qualify? Like, and how do you help them find employment?
So it's not a criteria, because we really are just a landlord. They sign a lease with us, so we can't make them stay.
Mhm.
If they want to move out, they can move out. But our partners work really hard to ensure that they're stabilized and in a position that whatever it is that they're moving into, they're going to be successful at. Yeah, so they're working with to ensure, do you have an income level that is going to allow you to be able to afford this apartment? Do you understand that if you move folks that you're friends with who are living on the street into this apartment, that you're going to get evicted for having someone living there who isn't on the lease? And that's going to cause problems for you down the road. Now you've got that eviction. So they do everything that they can to put folks in the best possible position. And then they just have to trust that it's going to stick with folks. As far as finding employment, that again kind of varies on the particular needs of a resident. Do you have an education that is going to allow you to get the job you need? If not, okay, well, do you need your GED? Let's get you that GED. Is it a situation where, we can get you a forklift driver certificate and get you a good paying job, driving a forklift in a warehouse? Let's do that. Is it, getting into, getting an associate's degree? Do you already have the skills and it's, you need help with a resume and just, interview skills so that you can actually get that job? They really work. It's very individualized with the particular resident.
Thank you.
And
Janet Mitbo's had her hand raised for a while. Jan, do you have a question you want to ask?
Oops.
Jan?
Yeah, I do. I wanted to ask about the next step, because you're putting people, and which is great. You're putting people into apartments and that they rent. And so I assume that the next step for them is we're trying to get wealth to have family wealth or whatever.
Mhm.
And so getting into housing, affordable housing, which is kind of the next step from you, isn't it? And then there's so I'm going to say, then there's the problem now on the north side of people from out of state buying up numbers of houses on the north side. This is kind of beyond where you guys are, but I wanted if you wanted to talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, so building generational wealth, we all know the best way to do that is to own a home. That's why I can sit here in my own home, because my grandparents and before that were able to have their home and build that generational wealth. It's absolutely vital. We are working at Beacon, we are working at that end that is about stabilizing and ensuring that folks are able to be successful in their life. We aren't quite getting to that level of home ownership yet. What we would love to see is that we're able to stabilize this generation so that next generation is able to grow up in a household where they know they're going to go to the same school every day. They're able to do their schoolwork in a good way. They're able to afford good food, so they're able to be healthy. They're able to know that mom and dad are going to be around and not involved in the criminal justice situation because they're trying to put food on the table. So that this generation is coming up in a way that they're going to be able to be successful, and hopefully then they'll be able to get that great education and get that job and be able to afford that home. We rely on so many other wonderful partners to kind of do more of that down payment assistance and those other types of things that allow people to today buy that home and build that generational wealth. On the North Side question, unfortunately, that's not just a North Side issue with outstate folks buying up homes. We see that in South Minneapolis and in St. Paul. And I mean, that was just a couple of years ago where in South Minneapolis, if you wanted to buy a home, you had to bid, $75,000 over the asking price because, folks from outstate were doing that. There was a bill at the legislature this year. I don't think it got much traction. But to make it so outstate corporations weren't allowed to buy single-family homes. Beacon itself doesn't have a position on that. But personally, I think we need to explore all of those types of things because we need folks to be able to own their own home, and we need to not have stock taken off the market. That's unfortunately another thing we see, that so much housing stock it's not rented, and it's not even being tried to be rented. It's just sitting there vacant when someone could call that home. We need to solve that issue as well. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I didn't see the hand because apparently I only see the hands that are have
live faces. Yeah.
I apologize for
that. So the 2040 plan changed the zoning so that more housing stock, we would have more housing stock. And supposedly there was going to be affordable housing included in that new build.
Yes.
Now, and you mentioned before that the definition of affordable housing is very expanded, were there ever any affordable homes at the rate at which that low side on the continuum in terms of income for people who?
I don't know the answer to that. I would be willing to bet that somebody turned their property into a fourplex, or I can't remember, was it triplex that they ended up maxing out on? I can't remember I don't live in Minneapolis, so I didn't follow that quite as close as I probably should.
Depends on the size of the lot.
Okay. I would be shocked if there was not some folks who care deeply about this issue and who created that type of property on their home, but not enough. The folks who were doing it in order to create housing on a larger level than just on their personal property, they weren't doing it.
Yeah, they were at the high end of affordable. The other thing I was going to say, did you ever happen to see the video that came out of Vienna, Austria on affordable housing?
Vienna? I don't think
it came Austria. Yeah, it came out and it was so interesting because they have this idea of what affordable housing is that is not, it's not so limited as ours. And I just recommend it for people to. Yeah, it was a very interesting discussion, and then how the housing was built. And of course, they have other things that support people where they, they don't have to worry about healthcare and things like that. But
yeah, with Housing First, a lot of people refer to that as the Finnish technique, because Finland has essentially ended homelessness using Housing First model. Like you say, Finland has so much else that they're doing.
They're supporting. Well, this was, I believe, Vienna, Austria, where this video is. It's a video, and if you just Google Vienna, Austria, affordable housing, it'll come up.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
I just wanted to tell you too that I looked it up and it's Sibley Manor.
Okay.
And you know, those apartments down there are very nice, very well taken care of, and they start at $750 a month. Which
That is a very good price.
yeah, that's an efficiency. And then there's $850 for a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, you know, living room. They're very, I know people who live there and they're very nice and very well taken care of.
Yeah,
So,
I'm just trying to scan through to see if I can see, and I'm not seeing it at least right off the bat as being like a common bond property or anything. So
yeah, I saw, when I looked it up, I couldn't figure out if it was one of the common bond ones or not.
yeah, it might just be naturally occurring at this point.
So, and there are lots of them. I mean, there's probably maybe 500 units there.
Oh, wow.
They're right down near the river. I mean, they're right on 7th Street.
Great.
I'm going to hop in here because we're almost out of time, and we have maybe Ellen Hughes is our last question tonight. Thank you, Craig, and thanks everyone.
But before Ellen asks her question, I will drop my email address in the chat. So if you have a question that we didn't get to, feel free to reach out and I will happily answer that.
Thank you.
All right, Ellen.
Thank you.
Oh, you're muted, Ellen. Ellen, you're muted.
I'm sorry. How are tax credits used for affordable housing? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? That's
Yeah. So
apparently a good resource. You said IRS is paying for a lot of buildings, and that's a great idea. How is that done?
yeah, so they are tax credits that the IRS sends out to every state proportionate to their need for affordable housing, basically. So obviously California gets most of it, and we get our percentage here in Minnesota. Then what they do is they go to the state, and each state has a mechanism for giving those out. So here it's that RFP process that Minnesota Housing does. And what they do then is, so they score all the applications that they get, and the highest scoring ones get either infrastructure bonds or low-income housing tax credits. Generally, we are going to get infrastructure bonds because they tend to award those more to folks building housing like we build. But we do occasionally get low-income housing tax credits as well. And what
is a tax credit?
So it is a tax credit. It's the ability to write off X amount of dollars for your taxes. Now, we are a nonprofit. Most of our partners are nonprofits. So we don't pay income taxes. So what we do then is we essentially go to market. There are attorneys who specialize in this, and we sell those tax credits to an organization who wants them. Generally, that ends up being banks. There can be other organizations as well, but more often than not, it's banks. We sell those tax credits to them. They give us the money, the cash, then that we then use to build the building. And then they use the tax credit to get the tax credit on and offset some of what they would owe.
So they're getting a profit because they're paying less for your tax credits than they're actually worth. Generally,
yes. It really is a market, and it ebbs and flows how much an organization is able to get for selling their tax credits. I don't know what they are currently. I know generally I've been told it's around 70 cents on a dollar.
Thank you.
What? They're
About
making a
70 cents
30%.
to a dollar.
You mean they're making a 30% profit?
Generally, yes.
Okay, not good.
It's not
Sorry.
great, no. And honestly, I the tax credit program works.
Yeah.
I would be very in favor of the IRS not being in the affordable housing game at all. and HUD, you know, housing and urban development, actually
Mhm.
doing housing and urban development. But that's a little bit about my business. So.
Public solutions to public problems
Exactly.
instead of market solutions to public problems.
Here, here.
But it's a huge philosophical shift and takes a lot of public pressure.
Not to get political here, but I would guess that if I told you all asked you all, when do you think the shift from HUD being the largest developer of affordable housing to the IRS being the largest developer of affordable housing happened, I bet you all could get pretty close to the year that happened.
Okay, tell
Ronald Reagan,
Exactly, the 1980s.
1980s.
Well, Craig, thank you so, so much. We are really grateful. Appreciate your work and being with us tonight. Thank
My
you.
absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Great to
Thank
see
you.
everybody.
Thanks,
and,
Greg.
Yay.
Thanks,
Next
Ellen.
week
It's
will
great.
be, next month will be in person. So watch your update and the website.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
Right.